Hello, greetings, and welcome to the Brett Norman YouTube channel on this May 20th, 2020. Actually, I'm not sure what day this video might be up on the internet, but today I'm going to read further into the seventh Vial by JA Wylie. We're on page 197. We're approaching halfway through the book. It's about a 400-page book. And this chapter is titled The 10-Horned and 7-Headed Beast of the Sea. And doing these readings and discussions mostly just to reflect onto a time of 172 years ago in Protestant Great Britain, where James Aiken Wylie lived. In some of his writings here, we're getting a view of what the author is trying to tell us about that time period. So I find it very interesting. I hope you do too. If you don't, you can find the book on the internet for free on archive.org. Just search the title, The Seventh Vial, James Aiken Wylie, and I'm sure you'll find it. It was published in 1848, so it's not a new book. It's been around for a very long time. So, here we go. The 10-horned and 7-headed beast of the sea. Before describing the third and last vial, we must speak of the object of that vial. We have no occasion to do so hitherto, because he has not yet appeared on the apocalyptic scene. The next vision of John, however, brings him before us. Paul, as well as other apostles, had spoken of one coming after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, the man of sin, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. But when Paul wrote, as he himself tells us, as Paul wrote, as he himself tells us, there were lets and hindrances in existence which obstructed the appearance of the man of sin, and should continue to do so for some ages to come. But the apostle intimated at the same time that these obstructions should in due time cease to exist, that the let would be taken out of the way, and then that wicked should be or would be revealed, affording to the saints an opportunity of displaying their patience in the endurance affording to the saints an opportunity of displaying their patience in the endurance of his tyranny, and to God of manifesting his power in breaking him in pieces. The Roman Empire, in its imperial form, was the grand let to the rise of popery in Paul's time. And for some time after, it was necessary that the throne of the emperor should be abolished in order that the chair of the bishop might be erected in its room. And to what were the great acts of the drama we have been contemplating? the events falling under the seals and trumpets, directed but just to break in pieces the fabric of imperial Rome, that the let being taken out of the way, the man of sin might be revealed. Accordingly, in the vision to which we have now come, we witness his portentous rise. Quote, "And I stood upon sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." Chapter 13. This chapter contains an account of the rise of the 2 beasts. The first beast is represented as rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The second beast is represented as rising out of the earth, having 2 horns like a lamb and speaking as a dragon. We shall briefly indicate what we are to understand by these 2 beasts. This will enable us to enter with advantage upon the exposition of the details of the symbols. The first beast, that which rose out of the sea, we take to be the secular empire with its papal head. The second beast, that which rose out of the earth, we take to be the hierarchy or ecclesiastical state. It was by the union of these 2 that the world was so long oppressed, and the church brought to the very brink of extermination. Between the two branches of the papacy, there was a close and intimate alliance, almost as between body and soul. The state served the same purpose to the popedom which the horse does to the rider, which the hand does to the will. It was the beast on which the harlot rode. It was the arm by which the papacy executed all its cruel and bloody decrees. It appeared to John as if he were stationed on the seashore, and as he gazed upon the waters, which at the time were agitated with tempest, he saw a monster emerging from the deep. His appearance was sufficiently dreadful. He had 7 heads, indicative of craft, 10 horns, the symbol of power, crowns upon his horns, the emblem of dominion and authority. On his heads, blasphemous titles, plainly indicating an idolatrous and impious character. Such was the frightful combination of civil qualities, craft, ferocity, power, and piety, which was apparent at the very first glance. It is usual in Scripture to represent tyrannical kingdoms under the symbol of a wild beast. It is impossible not to admire the propriety of the symbol. It is impossible not to admire the propriety of the symbol. It is the property of man to be ruled by reason, to be accessible to considerations of clemency and pity, and to have respect in his actions to the will of his Maker. It is the attribute of a beast, on the other hand, to be actuated only by brute passion and appetite. Now, have not the kingdoms of the world hitherto, and especially the 4 great despotisms seen by Daniel in vision, acted more like the beast of prey than as associations of reasonable and accountable beings? Let me read that again. Now, have not the kingdoms of the world hitherto, and especially the four great despotisms, yes, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, seen by Daniel in vision, acted more like the beast of prey rather than associations of reasonable and accountable beings? Have they not exercised a lawless violence all along and done whatever they listed without regard to the will of him who ruleth among men? The ascertained import of the symbol then renders it clear that it is the rise of a tyrannical and persecuting power that is here prefigured. A reference to the prophecy of Daniel will give us material aid in determining the kingdoms here symbolized. There is the closest resemblance, as any one may see who compares the two descriptions between the fourth beast of Daniel and the beast of the sea seen by John. The description given by Daniel is such as to lead us to conclude that the fourth beast was a compound of the preceding three. It had the teeth of the Babylonian lion, the claws of the Persian bear, and the spotted skin of the Macedonian leopard. That is, it possessed all the propensities of its predecessors in addition to its own characteristic qualities. Now, such is precisely the appearance of the beast of the sea, verse 2. Quote, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, unquote. Hence we conclude that it is one and the same political association which is symbolized by the fourth beast of Daniel and the beast of the sea of John. The 10 horns of the beast of the apocalypse answer to the 10 toes in the image in Daniel. But the fourth beast of Daniel is, by the universal consent of expositors, the symbol of the Roman Empire. And it is this empire, therefore, that is symbolized by the beast of the sea. Only we have mainly to do with it in its divided form, as held forth by the 10 horns. We may note this further point of resemblance, that the two beasts came to the same end. Daniel's is slain, and his body is given to the devouring flame. John's is taken prisoner at the Battle of Armageddon and is cast into the lake of burning with fire and brimstone. A short commentary will make the application of the vision to the papal empire exceedingly plain. The beast rose out of the sea. The sea is the symbol of society in a state of agitation. The Western world at this time was convulsed. The winds that agitated it blew from the north and were formed of the Gothic nations, whose successive eruptions completely destroyed the fabric of the empire and plunged society into the utmost confusion. It was out of this flood that the 10 Roman kingdoms of modern Europe emerged, quote, having 7 heads, unquote. Let us here avail ourselves to the aid of an interpreter who, we are sure, will not mislead us. In Revelation chapter 17, verses 9 and 10, we are told the 7 heads have a twofold signification. First, they symbolize the 7 hills, which were to be the seat of the government of the kingdom. This, as Eliot remarks, quote, is a character as important as it is obvious. It binds the power symbolized through all its various mutations from its earliest beginning to its end to that same 7-hilled locality, even like one scriptum. I can't read this now. This is probably Latin. Even like one Latin word and another, and as an essential part of this very constitution and life, unquote. This leads us at once to the city of Rome. In the passage just referred to, we are farther informed that the 7 heads also symbolize 7 kings, i.e., 7 forms of government. Now, such is the number of distinct forms of government which the Roman Empire has assumed from first to last: kings, councils, dictators. I don't know what that word is. Never seen it before. Maybe deceivers? I don't know. Military tribunes, emperors. Of these kings or forms of government, it was said, quote, 5 are fallen and 1 is, and the other is not yet come, unquote. 5 of these had fallen before the days of John. The 6th, namely the imperial, was then in being, and the 7th was then future. It was intimated, quote, and when he, the 7th head, cometh, he must continue a short space, unquote. Who is this 7th head? Whose term of existence was to be so brief? On no point are apocalyptic commentators more divided, or their conclusions more vague. Mede makes the 7th head the demi-Caesar, or Western Emperor. Bishop Newton thinks the dukedom of Rome, established after the conquest of the Heruli, is meant. Others suppose that the Christian emperors constituted the 7th head and had its wound by the sword of Heruli. Mr. Eliot finds the 7th head in the change of government that took place under Diocletian, who, together with his successors, in place of emperor or general of the Roman armies, became king or lord, and, in place of the laurel crown and purple, assumed the diadem and robe of silk, the Asiatic symbols of absolute rule. This was followed by great fundamental changes in the administration and is marked by Gibbon as the, quote, new form of administration, unquote. These are the nearest approaches which have been made to the solution of the difficulty of the 7th head. Quote, and I saw one of his heads as if it were wounded to death, unquote. This form of government was extinguished by the sword of the Goths, A new head was to arise in the room of that which was cut off, and this, though it should count only as the seventh, would in reality be the eighth, and under it the beast was to go into perdition. Quote, he is the eighth, and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. Unquote. Who is the eighth head? To this question, an answer is given by the angel himself. Quote, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth. Unquote. From which we infer that the papacy is the eighth head. This is a singular and apparently contradictory account of the beast. Quote, the beast that was and is not and yet is. How was it possible that both statements could be true, that the beast had ceased to exist and yet was in existence, i.e., when it was the object of wonder to all who dwelt on the earth? Question mark, yes. Let me read that again. How was it possible that both statements could be true, that the beast had ceased to exist and yet was in existence, i.e., when it was the object of wonder to all who dwelt on the earth? And yet this account is perfectly consistent with fact. Pagan and imperial Rome had existed, but the Gothic invasion had brought its existence to an end. Apparently forever, but it rose again in its decemregal state. Decemregal. Never heard of that term before. It rose again in its decemregal state. It was the same empire in reality which existed now in the 10 kingdoms as it had existed in its undivided form before the Gothic invasion. We have already shown the identity of the 7-headed and 10-horned beast of the abyss or sea with Daniel's 4th monarchy. But Daniel's 4th monarchy was the Roman Empire, and therefore the symbol before us is that of the Roman Empire, which again reappeared. It had apparently been wounded to death, but it was resurrected, and mainly through the papacy. Thus, the beast was not, and yet was. Quote, and 10 horns, unquote. This is explained in chapter 17, verse 12. Quote, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, unquote. Not individual kings, but lines of rulers or kingdoms which have received no kingdom as yet, an intimation that their appearance was still future. The empire had to be broken in pieces by the shock of the barbarous nations, and out of what had been one undivided monarchy, 10 distinct and independent kingdoms were to arise. It is well known that such was the origin of the 10 Roman kingdoms of Europe. Let us trace the boundary line of the Western Empire. The wall of Adrian, dividing Scotland from England, forms the boundary on the north. This line we prolong across the German Ocean to the Rhine. We ascend that river to Baden-Baden. Thence strike eastward to the source of the Danube, which we descend to Belgrade, and thence in a southwestern direction across the Adriatic and Mediterranean to the great desert of Africa. This line will include the Roman Empire of the West, and on this platform were the 10 kingdoms to arise. We should expect that these 10 kingdoms would be formed not long after the Gothic invasion, for the beast emerged from the flood with all the 10 horns already apparent. We are disposed to take the era of 532 AD, at that epoch we find the following 10 kingdoms within the limits we have traced: the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks of Central, the Aleman Franks of Eastern, and the Burgundic Franks of southeastern France, the Visigoths, the Sevui, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Bavarians, the Lombards. Great changes have occurred at various periods in Europe. Some of its states have fallen, and others arisen. But from the Gothic invasion to the present era, 10 kings had been the prevailing number of its kingdoms. Of these 10 kings or kingdoms, it was said that they, quote, received power as kings 1 hour with the beast, unquote. Okay, the Greek 1 hour indicates not the duration of their power, but the time when they should receive it, that their formation as independent kingdoms and the development of the beast should synchronize. Both should receive their power at one and the same time. It was at the end of the 5th century, or rather the beginning of the 6th, that the formation of the 10 Gothic kingdoms was completed, and by the same time the Pope, supported by the decrees of councils and the acquiescence of kings, had asserted his character of vicar of Christ and vicegerent of God, in virtue of which he claimed supremacy over all kings, and had begun to exhibit the anti-Christian characteristics of blasphemy and hostility to the saints. No sooner had the beast of the sea appeared than, quote, the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority, unquote. The dragon recognized the beast newly arisen as his lineal descendant, and as such hastened to serve him, heir to all his power, wealth, and dominion. By the dragon, pagan Rome is meant. By the seat of the dragon is denoted the countries over which Rome had swayed the scepter, which included the richest lands and the wealthiest cities of the Western world. All of these, once possessions of pagan Rome, papal Rome has long been mistress. She occupies the same seat as the dragon of old. On his heads were names of blasphemy. Every form of government which had arisen at Rome has assumed titles and arrogated powers of a blasphemous character. The chief magistrate of the Romans From the first was the high priest, Pontifex Maximus, and the supreme authority in matters ecclesiastical, to come down to the emperors. Some of them were addressed as the quote-unquote August and the quote-unquote Eternal One. Most of them were worshipped as God after death, and some of them were so even before it. But the last head, the papacy, far surpassed its predecessors. There is nothing in the history of the universe that equals the blasphemous titles and powers which the popes have assumed. They have openly laid claim to be regarded as the vicar